This is Lord Beerus, and unless you want your planet destroyed, subscribe to Geekdom 101. It's even better than pudding.
So Dragon Ball Daima ended on Friday, and a lot of people were very confused, understandably so, and very let down because the ending really seemed a lot more like a season finale instead of a series finale because there were a lot of plot threads that were sort of still left open and a lot of questions from the fandom. And like I said, understandably so. But there's a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of copium going on. I'm seeing some people, and I'm going to go into this post here and explain what's really going on here. I'm seeing a lot of people claim that Daima is a different continuity to Dragon Ball Super. And that's something that I think is the reason why people are believing this is because of the fact that events happened in Daima, because Daima's right after the Majin Buu saga and Super is a few years after the Majin Buu saga. And remember, in the first episode of Super, there was that mistranslation about the 6 months thing. Super, the events of Battle of Gods take place 4 years after the defeat of Kid Buu. So that would be about 3 years after Daima. Now, the questions that have come up time and time again is, where is Super Saiyan 4 in Dragon Ball Super? Why are the Supreme Kai and Kibido refused? And these are logical questions. This is not, I don't think that people are dumb in asking this. Now, if you've been following my channel, one of the things I've said for years, and people don't seem to understand it, at least the greater fandom doesn't. Many of you guys do, but the fandom outside of this channel, a lot of them don't, is I say that people have a real big misunderstanding about canon. And I've constantly said multiple times that the Japanese that make Dragon Ball, we're talking about Iyoku, Toei, Shueisha, they do not care about canon anywhere near as much as the West does. The idea of a canon is from the word canonical, which was used to legitimize which books of the Bible were inspired by God and which weren't. That's the origin of the word, and it's been used to kind of replace the word continuity. People want continuity in Dragon Ball, and I understand it, and I also want it, but the Japanese just don't care. Now, unfortunately, at least not as much when it comes to Dragon Ball. Unfortunately, though, this does lead to some questions that, again, people have logically asked. And I want to get to this post here from Let Me Cook. Well, unfortunately, Let Me Cook did not cook here because he made an assumption that's pretty wrong. And I'm going to get to what I mean here. This is all about what Akio Iyoku said about Dragon Ball Daima and its relation to the original series, like the original manga and Dragon Ball Z era, and Super. So he says the idea of Dragon Ball Daima came from Akio Iyoku, president of Capsule Corporation Tokyo. He's right about that. While he was working on DB Superhero. He wrote Superheroes, but he's talking about Superhero, the movie with Gohan, Beast, and Cell Max. At first, they didn't want Toriyama to be that involved in the series, but after presenting the idea to him, he was so excited that he worked on it on more than expected. This is something that we talked about on multiple streams here on the channel, that Toriyama, when he was brought in to work on the series, his imagination went wild, and he came up with all these vehicles and a lot of this lore that really was, in many ways, retconning stuff he had done in the past. And I have a whole video I'm working on about some of the retcons that modern Dragon Ball has given us that somewhat contradict the old stuff. So look forward to that coming very soon. I haven't done it yet, but it's coming. So he goes on to say, Dragon Ball Daima is a continuity of the Buu saga, like any OAV would be a continuity to any Dragon Ball event. So this is already wrong. An OAV, he means OVA, an original video production. Dragon Ball Daima is not an OVA. Dragon Ball Daima is a 20 episode anime miniseries. He writes it's a continuity of the Buu saga, like any OAV would be a continuity to any Dragon Ball event, and thus doesn't make them canon to the original series, even if Toriyama was involved in some of them. Well, here's the thing. You just wrote Dragon Ball Daima is a continuity of the Buu saga, but then you said that does not make it canon to the original series. This is why I talk about when I say that a lot of people do not understand canon. Because people throw the word around, and without really getting what's going on, one of the issues that we've been seeing lately is that the people that like Daima more than Super have gone on a crusade saying that Daima's the real canon and that Super's no longer canon. And then the people that like the Super stuff are saying that Daima's a different canon. And this has been like a back and forth now for actually not even just this week, but it's been going on for a while. One thing I notice about Dragon Ball fans is they oftentimes make up their own canon or what they believe is canon, and a lot of times it's biased. It's based on what they like. You understand what I'm saying? And that's why people oftentimes will jump and say that GT's not canon because they don't like it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only reason, right? Because Dragon Ball GT was referred to by Toriyama as a grand side story. That's a fact. However, Akira Toriyama has never used the word canon in any interview. I've had a check for $2,000 for the past 10 years for somebody to find a single interview, legitimate interview, where Toriyama has used the word canon. He hasn't. He never has. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. Now, he goes on to say Dragon Ball Daima is a non-canon or alternate sequel to Dragon Ball and therefore has no direct connections to Dragon Ball Super. Well, the issue with that is there's two big issues with that. Number one, in the first episode when they show Bardock, it's not the Bardock from the manga or from Z. It's the Dragon Ball minus Dragon Ball Super Broly Bardock with the armor, not the one with the headband. And number two, they also show the Kais when they have the flashback of Raimus, and it's the same Kais from Super that Toyotaro and Toriyama designed together. Now, if we actually go into the interview, this dude totally misconstrued the interview. Now, I don't know, let me cook. I want everybody to know, please do not send hate to him or anything like that. I don't know the guy, but he's objectively wrong. If we look at the interview, let's talk about the interview because this is really why I made this video. He says, in the first place, why did a new TV anime series start? Iyoku says, this is from a radio interview. He says, it was about 6 years ago, but when I was making Dragon Ball Super Superhero, I started talking about wanting to make a new series that was different from the movie. Like different as in it's not a movie, it's an anime series. I was making a movie and I was thinking of having the teacher make it for a while. The teacher's Toriyama because they call him Toriyama Sensei. Not to burden the teacher, but for him to watch it. What do you think? I threw it. As I progressed, the teacher was very enthusiastic. And like I said, guys, the teacher is just a different translation from Toriyama Sensei. Different translators in the fandom translate things differently. He goes on to say, it was different from the original plan, but after consulting with the teacher, we ended up making the most of it. So he's basically saying that he didn't want to burden Toriyama because Toriyama had worked on Superhero and he did not want to overstep his boundaries and have Toriyama now work on an anime. You understand what I'm saying? That's what he's saying here, man. I mean, that's all he's saying. And that's respect. Because, Toriyama's been pretty much semi-retired since, like, the 90s. He's helped with Dragon Ball Super, and he's written some one-shots, but the days of Toriyama writing a weekly manga, like he did back in the day, are done, right? He goes on to say, Mr. Toriyama said, what kind of place is the great demon world? Ideas such as the new characters were born, and then the worldview of Daima was solidified. This is something I talked about recently on stream, that when Akio wanted to bring back Super Saiyan 4 because the analytics showed how popular it was. They couldn't do the same Super Saiyan 4 that they did in GT with the Blue Waves and Golden Great Ape, and they couldn't do the Space Journey, right? So they had to change it up a little bit. And instead, that's when Toriyama decided, let's go to the Demon Realm. It's a place that's been talked about in the original manga, but not explored. Moving on. He goes on to say, it was the first time I made a series from scratch like this. And I think, because when Dragon Ball Super began, Akio wasn't that involved at that time, not at the beginning of it. And I think it was interesting from the teacher's point of view. It takes longer than the movie, and I spent time on the story while playing catch ball many times. In fact, the production of the animation had begun before the entire story was completed. It was needing my heart that much. That's why there may be a feeling of excitement like a weekly manga. So in this entire interview, there's no mention of anything like, well, Dragon Ball Super, this and that. The only mention of Super is that they were working on Superhero at the same time. However, if we look at the other translations of the interview, like the full translations, that actually explains what's going on. So this is the key part right here. Akio Iyoku said himself, Daima takes place after the Majin Buu saga, but how exactly does it fit into the broader Dragon Ball timeline? Toriyama personally wrote the story, and it's directly connected to the Majin Buu saga, Iyoku confirmed. Now, this is something that's obvious, because the consequences, and this is something we talked about last year, the consequences of what happened in the Buu saga with Dabura getting killed and Majin Buu coming to Earth is what led to the story of Daima, right? That's all that is said. Dragon Ball Super and the events of Battle of Gods and all that were not discussed in this interview at all. It's weird that people are basically trying to use this Iyoku quote to say that it's not part of Super when that's never been said. That's never been said in the entire interview. Now, here's the problem. And here's the real issue, is that Dragon Ball Daima ended in a way where we can figure, some of the things we can figure out, like why they never mentioned the Demon Realm again. Well, it probably wasn't important to them. Why did Vegeta never use Super Saiyan 3 again? And that's explained and visually in episode 19. Vegeta's Super Saiyan 3 eats up a lot of energy and stamina. It always has. Therefore, he doesn't use it anymore. That makes sense. Now, the real reason, if you want to know the real reason, it's because Daima was made after Super, and Toriyama and Akio decided to give Vegeta Super Saiyan 3 as fan service. But you know that. That's the meta answer. The big one is, well, what about Super Saiyan 4? Now, I've been talking for a while now that Super Saiyan 4 was triggered by magic. And in the episode, in episode 20, Goku says, I knew I had something else inside of me, but I wasn't sure if it was going to work. The only way it worked is thanks to Neva. So when you look at it from that perspective, that all makes sense. The problem is, and this is the real issue, Daima did not spell it out. And that's why people are confused. I do not blame fans for being confused, but I want fans to be careful and read things thoroughly and not just read, oh, hey, this guy said this, and not actually look deeper into the interview. That's the problem. People will just read something on Facebook and Instagram and say, oh, that must be right, without doing the deeper research. You understand what I'm saying? And so the problem is that there's not enough connective tissue between Daima and Super, and there are things that I think should have been and needed to be explained. But what I was worried about in episode 13 came true. They ran out of time. And I don't like that. I thought that was a planning mistake. To this day, I do. And the other thing is that it really felt, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, that it felt like Daima, because there's been people wanting a season 2 of Daima, and it really felt like they weren't even, we didn't even see Goku leave the Demon Realm. We didn't even see that. So I think that people are under the impression that maybe there was going to be more Daima, like a follow-up series or a movie or something. Now that Toriyama passed, this is where things get complicated. Because now we may never get an answer. Why? Because, once again, the people who made Dragon Ball do not care about canon as much as the fans do. This is objectively true. People got to cope with it. Now, if you think that Daima's in a different continuity, that's fine. I don't agree. However, I'm not going to, like, at first it used to annoy me, but I'm not going to, like, fight with somebody over that because this is ultimately their fault for not closing up the loose ends and making everything tie together. The reality is that people just have to understand that they don't care about canon like the people in the West do. Japanese fans rarely ever talk about it. It's mostly a Western concept. So because of that, they don't feel inclined to explain things. And that's not good. I actually agree with the fans. They should explain things. But with Toriyama no longer being with us, we might never get these answers. And that's ultimately the saddest part. If anything else comes out about this, I'll cover it here on the channel. Thanks as always for your support. Hopefully y'all understand a little bit more. Don't just read what somebody writes online, man. And don't even just listen to me. Do your own research. Look into things. I thoroughly encourage that. Because if you don't, if you think that I'm not giving you enough info, go look for it, man. There's plenty of stuff out there to dig into, but unfortunately, I've done a lot of digging, and we don't have anything yet. Maybe now that Daima's over, maybe Akio will do a follow-up interview and we'll get answers. But as of this video, which I'm recording on March 2nd, 2025, nothing yet. And we may not get anything, so let's not even hold our breath for it. See you soon. Take care of yourself.